It's been 7 years since U.S. President Barack Obama ended his country's combat mission in Iraq, but allegations of abuse remain. Stories of torture against Iraqis, like at Abu Ghraib, are only the beginning, and where they end is anybody's guess. Some people believe a former Defense Department official could hold the answers in his new book. In the book, Unjustifiable Means, Mark Fallon writes in the memoir about what he saw on the front lines fighting al-Qaeda. Up until now, the Pentagon has buried his book under pre-publication review, a process that should take 30 days, but has lasted more than 7 months. Well, joining me now is Mark Fallon, who's in Jacksonville, Florida, and joining me in the studio is retired U.S. Army Brigadier General Mark Kimmett. He was the spokesman for the U.S. military in Iraq under President George W. Bush. Gentlemen, I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on this. Let me begin with Mark Fallon first. I haven't read the book. I don't think I'm allowed to read the book yet. In a nutshell, what's in the book?
Well, the book talks about the failed policies that were enacted post 9/11. We kind of abandoned our values and we adopted some practices that have been to our national security detriment.
And when I finally get my hands on your book, is it going to be all unredacted, or is it going to have black lines through all the most juicy bits?
Well, we've made a decision to publish the book with the redactions in there. The government had the book for 233 days in a process, as you said, that should be 30. And right now we're at a critical junction where we have a president that has actually endorsed the use of waterboarding and other things that would be war crimes. And we're talking about the possible expansion of Guantanamo Bay. So I thought it was important to get my perspective and views out there to hopefully get out in the public debate and help shape national policy in this regard.
So let me then ask you very directly, sir, did the United States systematically conduct torture and cover it up?
Yeah, absolutely. We embraced torture. We enacted a national policy of state-sponsored torture. Those policies and those tactics spread from the CIA to the Department of Defense, went from Guantanamo on to Abu Ghraib, and created adversaries with people that we were looking to embrace when we invaded those countries.
Mark Kimmett, you were in Iraq at the time of Abu Ghraib. You were in the eye of the storm. I mean, they were putting you up there to sort of, defend what seemed to be the indefensible when those pictures came out. Does this sound consistent with what you experienced and what you know from your time working within these administrations?
No, not at all. I think that when you take a look at Abu Ghraib, for instance, we continued to have these inflammatory, unjustified words being used. The fact remains that Abu Ghraib was prisoner abuse. There was absolutely no doubt of that. That prisoner abuse was not conducted by interrogators. It was conducted by a small rogue group of National Guard soldiers that fundamentally had not been supervised by their superior officers in organization. They were fooling around. But to suggest that it was torture, systematic torture, or intentional torture on the part of the U.S. military inside Iraq at that time is absolutely false and inconsistent with everything that I personally saw.
Mark Fallon, prisoner abuse, just a few rotten apples.
No, it's absolutely false. That's the talking points from 2004. And when the book comes out, you'll see what actually happened at Abu Ghraib and how that happened and the results of that.
Okay,
well,
so give us a taste.
I would simply say that having not been there, I'm not sure how Mark would understand that.
Okay.
I was there. I was on the ground. I saw what happened. I looked at every piece of evidence. And to suggest it was absolutely false is clearly the opinion of somebody, not the facts, but the opinion of somebody who was nowhere near that situation at that time.
Okay, Mark Fallon.
Well, actually, I don't want to argue with the general here, but I did have forces in Abu Ghraib, and I had been to Iraq myself, and I do know the facts of the case. I was responsible for investigating al-Qaeda. And so when the book comes out, the public can make their own decision on that, as had the torture report, as had the Senate Armed Services Committee. So the facts are clear. Right. It's just some people fail to embrace them.
Yeah, it's interesting, Mark Fallon. Let me ask you, because some who might be familiar with the Senate torture report, as many call it, of December 2014, would say, okay, so What's going to be new in your book? Because that report told us of all sorts of horrible things beyond waterboarding, like, I don't know, rectal hydration and prisoners freezing to death on the cold floor, mock executions, people buried in coffins and so on for a period of time. So if they read all of that, what's new in your book?
What's new is putting it into context, talking about the insider perspective of how within the Department of Defense, how there was incredible fights to oppose that, how people tried to prevent the torture from happening, and then the results. What the strategic consequence have been, the cost and consequence for our nation.
General Kimmett, what's so wrong about sort of admitting that maybe this happened? Maybe there were not just maybe rogue elements on the ground amongst, you know, the prison guards and so on, but maybe within the administration at the time, yes, there were those who felt that they needed to go the extra mile to extract this information from Al-Qaeda suspects and so on. What's so wrong about saying maybe we made mistakes?
No, nobody's suggesting for a moment that mistakes were made inside of Abu Ghraib and inside most of these situations. However, they were mistakes not of ill intent, not conspiratorial. I mean, people draw their own opinions and they sell these opinions as facts. They were nowhere near the facts. But I think you bring up a very good point. As we retrospectively look at this situation, we see it through a completely different set of glasses than those that saw it either in the wake of 9/11 or actually saw it happen on the ground.
That sounds like a justification, doesn't it?
I'm not suggesting it's a justification. What it is, it's an explanation.
Is that a credible explanation, Mark Fallon?
Well, it is an explanation, but I hear a lot of excuses here. It was clearly state-sponsored torture. It was approved at the highest levels. There was legal manipulation. There was medical manipulation. The CIA started this program with the RDI program, and that spread to the Department of Defense. And we continue to live with the results today.
And Mark Fallon, and because you're two Marks, I have to keep on saying both your last names. Mark Fallon, when we look at the definitions here, right, there are those who say enhanced interrogation techniques. This is not torture. Something like waterboarding is an enhanced interrogation technique. It's not torture. That's what the president even says. What exactly are we talking about? When you say torture, generally, what image do you want to give the viewers? Are you merely giving them the image of something like waterboarding, which some would call enhanced interrogation techniques, or are you talking about more than that? Because I think that's crucial.
Yeah, the EIT program wasn't enhanced interrogation techniques at all. It was actually adopted from the way that the North Koreans treated our prisoners, and the EIT program was an excuse to inflict torture. And so the image of, and let's not make this antiseptic waterboarding. Our service members were waterboarded, at least the Navy portions were. They stopped that because it was an abysmal failure. But they were given 8 ounces of water for 20 seconds, not over 80 applications of water and gallons after you've been beaten, thrown against walls, slapped, abused, kept naked, put in coffins. So the abuses that occurred are just atrocious. And even though some photos from Abu Ghraib have been released, there are many, many more that are locked away in safes that the U.S. government never wants to see the light of day.
Mark Kimmett, is that true?
I am not aware of any photos from Abu Ghraib that haven't been released. Look, and again, let me stipulate, what was done at Abu Ghraib to those prisoners was absolute prisoner abuse. It was not done for the purpose of extracting intelligence out of those prisoners. It was, as you would say, properly, a couple of bad apples. It was a large number of bad apples that frankly were bored. They were having a good time. The ringleader was a former U.S. prison guard. So I think that you might understand that they were just trying to take some, what we call glory photos. They were wrong, they were prosecuted, but to try to link what those soldiers were doing on the ground to any program to extract intelligence information for the purposes of protecting our country is just incorrect.
If those photographs had not been released, had not been leaked, if 60 Minutes had not done that program, would it have been policy to keep it in-house?
Keep what in-house? The story
information
of Abu Ghraib?
Yes.
The story of Abu Ghraib, it's very important to understand that within 24 hours of General Sanchez seeing those photos, it was announced on international television that there was an investigation going on at Abu Ghraib. That was in January of 2004. The photos, by contrast, didn't come, I think it was March or April when they came out. There was absolutely no attempt to hide this information or suppress this information. It's just a fact.
Mark Fallon, what Mark Kimmett is saying suggests transparency and wanting to weed out the bad apples. Your book says otherwise. Tell me why.
Actually, the facts state otherwise. The Taguba report says otherwise. The Senate Armed Services Committee says otherwise. General Miller came over to Abu Ghraib from Guantanamo Bay and brought the cancerous torture techniques with them. So frankly, the facts don't support what the general is telling you today.
Well, but let me be very clear. I know that 24 hours after those pictures were shown to General Sanchez, it was announced because, number one, I was with General Sanchez when those pictures were shown, and number two, I was the one that made the announcement within 24 hours. So if that's what it says in the book, that's certainly not what my good friend General Taguba said in his investigation. I talked to him about this. Now, again, I understand what the purpose of trying to get the questions and the correct evaluation of these programs and what it has done to our programs in foreign countries and what it has done in terms of the perception of Americans. I'm not trying to, again, hide from that fact. In many ways, this was a stain on the military, it was a stain on the government, and a stain on our national character. I admit that, but we've got to do that rationally. We can't try to make these arguments based on opinions. We've got to use facts. And if somebody is trying, as the old saying goes, they're entitled to their opinions. They're not entitled to their facts.
Mark Fallon, to those who will read your book and say, yes, maybe you're right, and maybe we had to bend the rules sometimes, but we had to bend the rules to keep America safe and to wipe out terrorists, what would you say to them?
Well, the torture program was an abysmal failure. The general is absolutely wrong. There was no linkage to the bin Laden raid to torture techniques whatsoever. This has all been in the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence report. These are the facts of the case. I was responsible for investigating al-Qaeda at the time for trials for a military commission. I was responsible for giving President Bush reasons to believe to determine who to try before military commissions. I do know the facts, and I can tell you, torture produced no useful information that we didn't already have. All it did was embolden our adversaries and made terrorists unprosecutable. And we're struggling at we're struggling at Guantanamo today because of those policies.
And do you believe the CIA, the Pentagon, and all other arms of government are in denial about this?
Oh, no, not at all. I think those who are the torture advocates, the torture lobby, still embraces those 2002 to 2004 talking points. They continue to use the perception management campaign established that these things were safe, necessary, and effective. They were none of those things. They were not created by professional interrogators. They were not created by investigators. We knew how to interrogate al-Qaeda. We had done it for years. We had done it in the investigation of the USS Cole. We had done it during the first attacks on the World Trade Center. We had processes and we had policies in place. The programs that were enacted by psychologists who had no experience in interrogation, had no experience in the Middle East, and frankly didn't know what they were doing. They were the modern-day equivalent of snake oil salesmen, and we bought it hook, line, and sinker.
Okay. I wish we had more time. We do not, but I think it's been important that we had this discussion and we had both sides on it. Mark Fallon and Mark Kimmett, it's been a pleasure having both of you on the program.